Only losers should fear recessions. I mean that like from the bottom of my heart.
In the beginning, I was way too soft on people.
This is what we have to do. The last 2 years have been really easy.
Being the person that you want to be is hard.
We work evenings, we work weekends. Like, it's just, if you don't want to do it, you don't need to be here, but like, this whole team needs to pull their weight.
Do I think that our net worth will be higher than Gary's by the time we're Gary's age? Yes.
So before we jump into this, how many of you guys have seen the podcast interview that we all did before? By a show of hands. Awesome. So I know from that podcast, I had a bunch of questions after where I'm like, oh, I should have asked him that, you know? And just hearing you guys talk, you know, it spoke to me to a lot of like, man, okay, how do I even focus on one thing? And you and I have had this conversation a lot. Alex is always getting on me, and I'm like, we were talking yesterday at Yogurtland, and I'm like, I'm just going to tell him about Content Empire. He's like, don't do it. And I was like, I'm going to do it. But nonetheless, I think there's so much truth to what he's saying. Like, in order for even a guy like me to get to the next level, I'm going to have to really focus in on one of these vehicles to really hit it home. But the first question I had for you guys was, from your guys' perspective, not being necessarily in investing per se, how do you guys navigate a changing economy? Because the last however many years, we've been very fortunate to be in a bull market and everything. And are you talking to your portfolio companies about different ways you're going to make your offers, or how are you navigating that?
I think there's two pieces to it, which is like selection of companies, and then what we do with existing companies. When we started acquisition.com, like one of the biggest things that we thought was like a strategic advantage, I guess you could say, is that we have the advantage that we can pick whatever kind of companies we want. And so we don't need to pick companies that we think would just absolutely just like be trashed during a recession. So that is like an advantage that we have. On the other side, there's a lot of businesses that they'll be affected, but it won't be detrimental. And so I think that we have some in our portfolio where it's like they're affected, it's not detrimental. And so what we look at is like, I think we kind of had a test run of this during COVID, which is, you know, how do you adjust your marketing? How do you adjust your back end? Ben Horowitz talks about there's wartime and there's peacetime. If nobody's read the book, A Hard Thing About Hard Things, like it's a great book. You know, for us, like when we had COVID and it hit gym launch, that was tough. And so we did an entire speech to our team on how now it's wartime. So what does that mean? What does that mean for marketing? What does it mean for sales? What does it mean for IT tech? Our entire team as a whole, right? We were like, hey, listen, you all work nights now. Like you work into the evening. That's like a non-negotiable, because like our customers are going out of business every other day. We work evenings, we work weekends. Like it's just, if you don't want to do it, you don't need to be here, but like this whole team needs to pull their weight. That's the same mindset that we give to our portfolio companies as we see this looming in the distance. When we talk about tripling a business, we give ourselves 3 to 5 years. So like that's a long time. So like there might be a year or two where it's shaky, but like as long as we can still achieve those objectives in that period of time and we can make progress, even if it's not being recognized immediately, we know we're putting in the infrastructure in place so that when things turn around, it's there and we're protecting what's already been built. So that's the best you can do in some. In others, I think it's a lot more taking advantage of the situation. So there's some that are positioned well, and like depending on what market you're in, where it's, and honestly what kind of entrepreneur you are, I think where you can get more aggressive. We have certain CEOs that we know where like we're going to take advantage of this downtime and we're going to be aggressive and we're going to acquire the entire market because everyone else is scared. So like Gym Launch, for example, we went all in on marketing during COVID, and most of our competitors went out of business. And we now are doing more revenue than we were, we're pretty much over our peak year. And so that just shows the resilience of a business if you're willing to not act out of fear when you're actually feeling it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I'll just add one thing, which is only losers should fear recessions. I mean that like from the bottom of my heart. If you are a winner, then all that happens is you just get to eat everyone else's lunch. Like that's all it is. So everyone else who shouldn't have been in business now will not be in business. And then whatever little crumbs and whatnot just filters up to the guys who provide value. So it's still business fundamentals, it's just you get away with less. So the rules of the game don't change. You just provide more value at a really reasonable price. You do all the things about being better. You contact your leads, you follow up, you make sure you're doing email marketing. You know what I mean? Like you're doing all the things that you should be doing, and it works in any economy.
And I totally agree with that. I was telling the story during my presentation of doubling down on marketing during COVID, and a lot of my competitors, they stopped marketing, and all of a sudden we took the market share. I think we're in a very big opportunity in all industries to, just like you said, it depends on the entrepreneur. How risk tolerant are you? Or how resilient are you? What do you guys think about, you know, coaching these CEOs? One big thing that to me seems like a theme is leadership. How are you guys testing leadership? How are you developing leadership and really getting these CEOs and these, founders to impart that on their employees, like you said, where, hey, you're going to work nights. If you don't want to be here, don't be here. We don't need you. We need people who are ready to roll.
I think that there's two ways, which is one, it's by example, right? I think that the way that we coach them is how they should coach their executive teams, and that should stream down to their organization. And so one of the biggest things that we were actually just talking about was I was talking about the theme for next quarter for us, and I want it to be push. I look at what I do and what Alex does when we're coaching CEOs that a lot of people don't do, is when there's that gap of awkward or that thing they say that is not true, or that there's the fluff. We push into it and we're that's just tell me the truth. By us having those conversations with them, what I have gathered from their teams, from them, from the feedback, is that they have then learned to have those conversations, not only with their teams, but with themselves. Because I think what a lot of people are doing is they're not lying to us, they're lying to themselves about their business. And then we just get the leftovers of that, which is by consequence, they lie to us. And so I think that one of the first things you have to do is, I think it's Mark Zuckerberg says, your number one job as a CEO is to be a truth teller. In the beginning, I was way too soft on people. Alex was probably way too hard, I was way too soft. I realized that by being soft, I was actually putting people at a disadvantage because I wasn't addressing the hard truths that need to be addressed. And so we do that by setting the example, by not taking bullshit from anybody that's on the calls with us, when we're checking in with them.
A big thing I hear you talk about, and you guys said it here just now, that you go into a business and you say, hey, we want to triple your revenue. It might take 3 to 5 years, right? And one thing that's apparent listening to you guys speak is playing the long game, right? And I think so many of us sacrifice the long game so many times in order for the short-term gain. Can you guys elaborate on that, especially for real estate investors who, by nature, it is a long-term game in order to become wealthy and build a portfolio and all those things?
You have to act as if it were true, because on some level, acting short-term serves you in a way. And so you have to figure out why you do this short-term activity that doesn't serve you, because it does serve you somehow. And so if you can actually name the thing that it does for you by being short-term oriented, then usually you can kind of quantify the thing that you need to give up to get the thing that you want more. And so I think a lot of times it's naming our enemies, naming our foes, naming the things that we believe to be true that aren't. And then once you pull them out and look at them, it's easier to overcome them. I want to be very clear here. I do not have patient tendencies. And that may sound crazy to you who have watched our content and our podcasts and speaking stuff. That may sound absurd, but I still struggle with it. And giving myself the definition of learning as same condition, new behavior, and then knowing that the behavior is the thing that determines my character trait, not how I feel about it. And so I can feel impatient, I can feel uneasy, I can want to take the short money. But as long as I do not take the action, I am able to cast one more vote in the favor of the character trait that I want to embody. And I think most of us are on this entrepreneurial journey for who we're going to become rather than what we're going to own. And so I think that if we rewrite the journey as the hero's journey of who we want to be, then a lot of times the outcome of the decision, and it does outperform over the long haul by a mile, that's why you want it. But the short-term benefit of rewarding yourself and reinforcing the behavior by saying, I just exhibited this behavior, that is a good thing. Then it gives you a faster feedback loop for behaviors that will pay off longer. And so if there is a single trait that any person wants to develop, it is the ability to weather short-term discomfort for long-term achievement. It's making the short-term trade. And I just I can tell, it's just paid so many dividends in my life, and it's been so hard for me. And so I'm sharing this because it's hard. Being the person that you want to be is hard, and it doesn't feel easy. And so it's just doing it anyways, knowing that you don't feel that way. And a lot of times in decisions, it's saying no to that feels exciting.
So speaking of character traits, we talked about patience, we talked about leadership. Are there any other ones that you think we as entrepreneurs and investors should be developing?
I have two that I talk about a lot, which I think are the dynamic duo, I don't know, which is industriousness and enthusiasm. Because typically when you talk to entrepreneurs, you've got people on one side, which is they're very charismatic, they're very enthusiastic, they're very personality driven, they're very exciting all the time, but they lack industriousness. They're I have other people do all that for me, right? On the other side, you've got people who require no recognition, but they're not necessarily the funnest to be around because they're so intense all the time. And I think that when you can marry those two characteristics together, that is what creates a true leader. Those are the two foundational pieces, and that's something John Wooden, he mentions he has a pyramid of success, and those are two of the cornerstones. And that just always is something I've looked for, and I've realized like in my whole executive team, they all have it.
The number one red flag for us, besides ego, which is the obvious one, but like the second biggest red flag that many people here might suffer from is emotional reactivity. So I'd encourage you, if you get a chance, anyone here familiar with Gymshark? Ben Francis, he's a young kid. I mean, he's like 30 now, whatever, or 28, something like that. They're worth $1 billion. If you watch his interviews from 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 1 year, his demeanor completely changes. And when you see like the biggest CEOs, and this is something that I've observed, which is why I wanted to emulate that, is that they're even. Like there's no fear of telling them news because you don't, and like this is from the team to you, they don't fear an outburst, they don't fear some reaction. And what many entrepreneurs, especially earlier ones, they're like this. They're so erratic. They're all over the place because they have these feelings, and what happens, they change the business to feel better, when the business and your feelings should be completely divorced. And so like, I feel bad, therefore I will change something to try and feel better about myself. And it kills your business. And you do it over and over and over again. It confuses your team. No one knows the direction because you keep changing all the time. And so emotional reactivity is one of the biggest screeners that we look for in CEOs who are coming in. Because if someone's like a rock, business as a whole is not complex. It's hard, but it's simple. And so I think the big thing is like, the further we can separate someone's emotions from the decisions they're making about how they're going to grow their business, the easier it is to grow it. And so it's just like, we just don't have this chaos element that just gets sprinkled into every once in a while. If we just eliminate that, the business grows.
Totally agree, because I think, for me anyways, if I show emotional just roller coasters to everyone, they're gonna be like, dude, are we even gonna have a company tomorrow? It's important to show that kind of even keelness. I always say like, the person you wanna be like, if you watch sports, is Tim Duncan. That dude has no emotion, but he's won, 5 championships, just shooting bank shots all year for 20 years. So let's talk a little bit about content, because it's interesting. I mean, for a guy like me, I started making content a couple of years ago, and I saw the opportunity, right? And I was successful beforehand, but I was not making $1.2 million a month when I was 24, right? And you guys were obviously making a ton of money. You sold your company, and yet you still chose to go down this road of making content. Why?
People really need this. They need to hear like what it's really like to run a business, rather than, I think there's a lot of like flash out there and a lot of misconceptions around it. And I felt like building the business was one of the most painful things I've ever done. It was also one of the best things I've ever done, but I feel like people don't talk about that. As we started to talk about it in acquisition.com, it was like, we want to document and share everything for free, because that is the only thing that's going to live on beyond us. That's the way that we can contribute to society. We don't need the money. Nobody else is doing it. Like, it just feels good to give back and not have to ask for something in return. And so that's why, you know, I mean, I'm sure on some level of like selfishness, it like feels good to give, you know? But I really just want to spare people the pain that I felt when we built our businesses, because it felt lonely and it feels lonely. And even now, you know, we're building acquisition.com again. People are like, oh my gosh, it must be, I'm like, it's still hard, like fourth time around, it still sucks sometimes. So I think it's just wanting to, it's kind of like, I think a lot of people do things to serve their younger self, similar to that.
The pros are that, you know, you build a brand, and you get, for us, we get really great companies that come in that we wouldn't normally be able to even see. They wouldn't know we exist. And so that's like one of the pros. We get, one of the other pros is we get amazing talent. So we get way more people who, and we don't have to indoctrinate them, they already believe what we believe. And so it's a fast track of getting way better people in the business and the portfolio companies, which is one of the things that we're able to do. That's one of our unique advantages, is that like we can attract talent and then distribute them into companies that would otherwise not be able to get those types of players. The heart reason for me was that I really genuinely wish, like the guys, my heroes that I looked up to, Elon and Warren, and I call them by their first names because they feel like homies. You know, Jeffy B, you know. I wish they had made content. I want to know what growing Amazon in 1997 was like. Our hope, or at least my hope, is that we aren't the greatest of all time. Because if we are, then we will have failed. Because the whole point is that like there is somebody in the crowd who's 20 and will have used all the lessons that we learned and will be further when they're 25 than we are when we're 35, because they got to use all those lessons. So they'll be the greatest. But then hopefully they'll pay it forward and then somebody else will do it, when they're 20 or whatever. And so it's just like the whole game gets elevated. And I always find it interesting when people are like, these kids these days, they have it so easy. And it's like, well, that was the point. Like, didn't we say we wanted to make it better for everybody else? Like, that's what we want to make an impact in the world and help people out. It's like, that's what that looks like. They have easier lives. Gary didn't have Gary. Like, Gary paved the way for all of these, so many of us who make content now. Like, he didn't have a Gary to emulate. And so, like, do I think that our net worth will be higher than Gary's by the time we're Gary's age? Yes. But that doesn't mean that we're better. It just means that we had him to mentor us indirectly. And so to the same degree, like, there's going to be somebody right now, and there's probably somebody in the audience who's going to be way further ahead than we are at our age. And that's cool. That's the point.
Who's taught you what you guys know? Do you think it's the majority of just trying and failing, or was it masterminds? Was it paying consultants? Who was it?
I think that most of our success and like ability to do it is that we're not afraid to fail. Like, you learn quickly when you can fail, and then like instead of dwelling, you just get back up and try it again. And it might mean it takes 2 weeks to figure it out, but it's way faster than reading 7 books that takes you 3 months to figure out. And so I think a lot of our success was like, we are just totally fine in the unknown. Most people, the reason they can't succeed is what you're looking for when you look for a mentor in a book is certainty. What you want is reassurance and certainty. If you can survive and you can face uncertainty and you can be okay with uncertainty, then you realize that you don't actually need all those things. You have common sense, you have thinking power, and you can actually think on your feet. You can iterate, you can innovate. Half the time when we come in and we like see the first few things in the business, I'm like, they already know they need to do this, but they want somebody else to reassure them it's the right move. And so if you're okay with uncertainty, you don't need as much guidance, you don't need as much of like a blueprint to fall on, because you're okay if it happens, if it doesn't happen, maybe it'll fail, maybe it won't fail, I'll handle it either way. And so I think it's like that sense of, if you can trust yourself to that extent, then it's a lot easier to take those risks.
I think it's learning on the go. Like, we spend every dollar we possibly can on self-education. So, the mentorships, the masterminds, the workshops, the books, the courses, the whatever. We also spend as much time as we can consuming things that we think are going to benefit us. And I'm a huge fan of like one-on-one stuff. Like, go pay someone an egregious amount of money who has a skill that you want, and then just ask them to tutor you in it. I learned so many skills that way. I learned how to run Facebook ads that way. I learned so much stuff just by paying someone to teach me. The learn on the go mentality is just that you don't need to learn it and then go. You learn while you go. And so just because, to Leila's point, you have incomplete information, doesn't mean you need to have incomplete action. Because you're going to learn more from the completed action than you would from the lesson that you were trying to learn as research beforehand. So it's more so that we take as much of the frameworks as we can before we apply, so we can be directionally correct, and then iterate from there. If there's one mindset shift that I can give everyone here, it's about being directionally correct. And so rather than trying to have the perfect solution or the perfect outcome, it's saying, will this get me closer or further from where I'm trying to go? Like, if you can make that one pivot or one shift in thinking, then it allows you to massively speed up your decision loop. Because it's much easier to say, this will get me closer, this won't, and then just take the action. Compared to, there's 10 things here, which of these do I think? Well, there's 20 other you're not gonna know. So this one's directionally correct, I'll do it, and then as I take the steps, the terrain becomes illuminated, and I can see my next step much more easily, rather than playing in the hypothetical with 100 variables in your head, which is just not productive. So, incomplete information, but complete action.
I have people tell me all the time, like, they'll give a bunch of theory, they'll give a bunch of like projections and all these things. I'm like, why don't you just go out and start talking to people and trying it? See if they'll take it, and you'll get way more feedback and refine your offer from there, versus like creating the ultimate thing that never gets tested. Anything else you guys would like to share?
Appreciate you all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Awesome. Give Alex and Leila a round of applause.